Optimized here. The SCP verse is known for its overpowered and weird anomalies. I wanted to make a vid on the strongest SCP, but that is a complex question that requires a future video. So I decided to do an easier video on some of the weakest SCPs. The SCP Foundation is a fictional organization dedicated to securing, containing, and protecting anomalies called SCPs. These anomalies can range from a cuddly orange blob of happiness to an immortal reptile that hates everything. The three main categories for SCPs are Safe, Euclid, and Keter. There are others, but they are very uncommon. Safe means they are simple to contain, like SCP-999. Euclid means they are not fully understood or have unpredictable behavior, like SCP-096. Keter means they are hard to control or pose a threat to the SCP Foundation or humanity, like SCP-682. Just because an SCP has a higher threat level, that does not mean they are more powerful. For example, a nuke would be considered safe as it's easily containable. With that out of the way, let's move on to the SCPs. For the first SCP on this list, I have SCP-085. 085 is the result of an experiment between SCP-067 and SCP-914. SCP-067 is a pen. When that pen is held, it takes control of the person and writes or draws something related to the user. SCP-914 is a machine that takes things and transforms them into something worse or better, depending on what it is set to. 067 drew a young girl, and the girl was put into SCP-914. The result made 085, a sentient drawing. SCP-085 is a 2D girl that can interact with a 3D world. SCP-085 is considered safe because she is no real threat and can just be stored in a room. She is so high on this list because we don't know if she's actually 2D or just a thin layer of ink making her 3D. Although it does not matter much because she is infinitely above some of the other SCPs on this list. Coming in at number 4, I have SCP-3450. SCP-3450 is a text document containing a fan fiction of Kirby. Any original character of the person reading the text document will get eaten by Kirby. The person reading the text document will lose their creativity upon repeated use of SCP-3450. This led to the researcher not figuring out much about SCP-3450, as his tests were getting less and less creative, resulting in characters such as Larry Potter and leading to this transcript. I couldn't do it. I stayed up all night trying to make something new, but nothing worked. When I got to work today, I opened up SCP-3450, scrolled past chapter 1, and it ended with nothing there. I feel like, shit, I can't even think of a metaphor. I don't know what to do. SCP-3450 is considered safe as it can be easily stored. SCP-3450 is a text file, and that is the reason why it has this spot. A text file can't do much. If you want to consider SCP-3450 as the story itself, it would be weaker, as it would be fiction. Third on my list, I have SCP-3143. SCP-3143 is an intrafictional construct. An intrafictional construct is basically just a fictional entity. The SCP Foundation contains him using a fictional narrative that interacts with him. To best understand SCP-3143, I'll let the creator explain. In a post on Reddit, he says, SCP-3143 is a fictional entity, an interfictional construct, similar to Fred, but with the ability to collapse reality temporarily into its narrative. To interact with this entity, the Foundation creates its own fictional department, complete with fictional employees, to try to take control of the narrative. Foundation effectively writes Foundation fanfiction and posts it to the INT SCP-FM, a fiction where they contain SCP-3143. The result is that SCP-3143 interacts and transforms with this fiction, effectively writing themselves out of the fictional trap the Foundation created. SCP-3143 is considered Euclid class because he can collapse reality into a narrative, and the people involved in that don't remember being in it. SCP-3143 is a fictional entity, making him below reality. Fictional transcendencies like this place the thing in a dimension below. SCP-3143 would be 2D. You could argue that because SCP-3143 collapses a fiction into another fiction, this would make him 1D, as it is 2 levels of infinity deep. SCP-3143 is so high on this list because he can interact with other realities that are higher than his. Taking my number 2 spot for the weakest SCPs, we have SCP-3167. SCP-3167 is a fictional entity that appears in stories with a single reality, such as a novel series. SCP-3167 seeks out a character within the narrative and kills that character, then dips. It just hops into a story, kills someone, then leaves. SCP-3167 can only affect one instance of the story, as in he can only influence one copy of a book at a time. SCP-3167 appears in Sherlock Holmes and Sword Art Online. He kills Sherlock Holmes, nods to Watson, then just leaves. In SAO, he appears in the fight with Kirito and Heathcliff and just hits the ground, logging everyone out of SAO. SCP-3167 made it to where the internet could not handle a game the size of SAO, effectively canceling the rest of SAO for the better. SCP-3167 is considered Keter because of its difficulty to contain and its ability to alter memories and mess with perception. SCP-3167 is below SCP-3143 because SCP-3143 interacts with higher dimensions, while SCP-3167 only interacts with the fiction it's in. God, that's a sentence. Before I get to my number 1 spot, I want to make an honorable mention of Pesterbot. Some SCPs did not make it because they could ascend through narratives or had arguments for them being really strong, but there was one SCP that stood out. SCP-1370. SCP-1370 is a small robot that hates humans. It is basically this weak, pitiful robot with an attitude like SCP-682. One of the experiments introduced a plant with a speaker, and Pesterbot fought the plant for 6 minutes. Pesterbot knocked the plant over and it fell on him, pinning him to the table. SCP-1370 is ironically too strong for this video, as he is a 3-dimensional being. The number 1 spot for the weakest SCP goes to SCP-3145. SCP-3145, also known as the Giving Man, is a being who kept giving parts of himself away until he was nothing. SCP-3145 then gave his control away, being described as less than nothing. SCP-3145 can only interact with fiction. SCP-3145 usually just kills when he's in the narrative he has access to. He does this because it makes him feel in control. This basically means he is definitively fictional and can't interact with higher dimensions, making him the weakest on this list. SCP-3145 is considered Keter because he is an anti-meme, or a self-keeping secret. This means any action SCP-3145 does will be unknown to the Foundation, making it dangerous. I might revisit this once I figure out weaker SCPs. There were also SCPs like SCP-2747. SCP-2747 is also fictional, but it can be interpreted as powerful because if it were to interact with our reality, it would destroy it. I will eventually do a vid on the strongest SCPs, or the top 5 strongest SCPs. It'll take a while as there's a lot of SCPs to look into, and the vid will have a lot of explaining in it. But I'll see you next vid. Watch this video if you want to see my take on Goku vs Saitama.